Welcome back to the NC Everything podcast. I'm your host, Curtis, and this is the bi-weekly show where I talk about everything that has anything to do with North Carolina. I know I took a little break toward the end of December. I feel like I'm a little late getting back for 2025, but it is good to be back, and thank you all for being here. I had a couple murders picked out to start the New Year's out with, and I decided to scratch that. And then I was thinking about maybe doing a natural area, but ultimately I decided on Stoneman's Raid. A lot of times when I'm riding through West North Carolina, you'll see road signs and historical markers for Stoneman's Raid. I've been seeing them for years, and I read up a little bit on it over the years. I decided to go ahead and pull the pin and cover Stoneman's Raid to start 2025 out. So the Stoneman in question here is Union Major General George Stoneman. He was from Busty, New York. He went to West Point Military Academy, and his roommate was Thomas Jackson, who some of you may know would eventually be called Stonewall Jackson. Now, like most of the West Point graduates back then, he was sent to the Mexican War, but by the time he arrived down to fight, the fighting had commenced. So he didn't actually see any action during the Mexican War. And for most of the Civil War, he kind of bounced from place to place. He started in command of Fort Brown, Texas, and then he got sent east to serve under General McClellan over in Virginia. And if you know anything about General McClellan, he didn't do so good. He went down in history as kind of a bad general. Some may even call him a coward, but he wasn't too anxious to fight. And you can read up on him at a different time. But because McClellan has a bad reputation, most of the people who served under McClellan have a bad reputation. And George Stoneman was certainly one of those guys. But now let's fast forward to almost the end of the Civil War. In March of 1864, General Sherman performed his now very famous or infamous March to the Sea, where he marched to the sea and then up the coast, burning everything in sight and essentially crippling the South. And Sherman's March to the Sea was so successful that they wanted to perform that again with General Stoneman. So now it's early 1865, and General Grant's been trying to get Stoneman to start his raid for 2 or 3 months now. Since January. It's March, and he's been on General Stoneman's butt since January. Go ahead and start your raid. You need to get started. Get going here. And General Stoneman has just kind of been sitting on his thumbs. Now, kind of like McClellan probably taught him to do, he was blaming it on bad weather, lack of forces, having to rewrite the plan and all kinds of different stuff. He had an excuse this whole time why he wasn't getting started. But finally, in late March, early April of 1865, Stoneman's raid began. Now, when the raid started, Stoneman had about 6,000 men in his cavalry. And the plan was, they knew Lee was up in Virginia, and they knew he was dwindling. So they were expecting Lee to be defeated. And just in case he was defeated and he tried to escape south, Stoneman, they wanted to kind of cut off any kind of escape routes he may have so that he possibly could be arrested. Now, we all know that General Lee peacefully surrendered and he wasn't arrested. But this was a just-in-case plan. If he tried to run, they were going to arrest him if they could catch him. So Stoneman's cavalry, they moved out of Tennessee into North Carolina and came through Boone, North Carolina. So in Boone, they killed 9 people, they captured 68, and they burned down the jailhouse. From here, they moved out of the mountains into the Yadkin River Valley. And here, they were mostly just resupplying, getting fresh horses, fresh food. And here, his raid kind of got stuck for a little while just because heavy rains had made the Yadkin River impassable. So even though he wanted to keep moving and prove himself, he did get kind of stuck in the Yadkin River Valley. After 3 days, he was finally able to cross the river, and from here, he moved into Virginia. He tore up a bunch of rail lines around Lynchburg and Christiansburg. On April 9th, he headed back for North Carolina, and he got into an engagement in it's Henry Courthouse, but it's present-day Martinsville. And here he lost 5 men, 4 others were wounded, but then Union reinforcements showed up, and they won that fight. From Henry Courthouse, present-day Martinsville, they moved over to Germantown, which is right outside Winston-Salem. I actually have family in Germantown, so I've been there several times. And while in Germantown, he altered his plan. He decided to split his troops, which is a common practice, but he wanted to split into two different columns. So the first group was under command of Brigadier General William J. Palmer, and they were sent to capture Salem, which would eventually become Winston-Salem, and then move east towards Greensboro. Then one thing I'll add here, and it'll come back. By this point, Jefferson Davis, the president of the Confederacy, he's running for his life. They're out to arrest him, and he's on the run. So when Brigadier General William J. Palmer, when he was in Greensboro, he burned a bridge over Reedy Fork. He burned a bridge over Reedy Fork Creek. I think it's Reedy Fork Creek. It just says Reedy Fork here. Anyway, he burned a bridge, and apparently when he burned this bridge, they set fire to it, not knowing it only a few minutes earlier, Jefferson Davis had passed right across that bridge, running from the Federals. But anyway, also while in Greensboro, they destroyed trains, more bridges, a gun factory, and a commissary store somewhere between Greensboro and High Point. Now, part of this group also split off to go tear up Lexington, but they ran into some resistance, and so they canceled that destruction mission and headed back to meet up with Group 1. Now, the second group, after he split up, that was the first group. Here's the second group. The second group headed towards Salisbury. Salisbury, if you don't know, is a huge, even back then, it was a huge train depot. So if you could tear that up, you could really cause some problems for the South. Also, there was a Confederate prison there. They passed through the Moravian community of Bethania and finally got to Salisbury. And they reached Salisbury on the early morning of April 12th, and they ran into Confederate troops. So this began the Battle of Salisbury. And what I read, it sounds like they pretty much set the whole town of Salisbury on fire during the battle. And I'm not sure if you'd call it a real battle. I mean, it is, but it's, during this whole battle, they were burning everything. It said that you could see the flames from Salisbury 15 miles away at night. Well, they tore up the town for 2 days, and then this second group split into two groups, kind of like the first one did. The first subgroup of here, they headed west again to Statesville. They wanted to tear up some more train depots in that area. The other group rode toward Lincolnton. They wanted to kind of keep pressure on Charlotte. So what they did was they attacked the home guard. They started guarding bridges. They didn't burn as many bridges, I don't think, but they were guarding bridges and just keeping a lot of pressure on the town, keeping Charlotte pretty much on lockdown. And this group stayed around Charlotte until April 17th. By this point, Stoneman felt like he had accomplished everything he set out to do. And so they all headed back to Tennessee. Now, along the way, they were burning more bridges along the Catawba River in South Carolina, and they burned stores in Statesville and Newton. And when they got to Morganton and Asheville, this is one of the only mentions where they actually started robbing houses and robbing from the people. On April 23rd, they ran into more Confederate troops, but they weren't fighting this time. By this point, word had got out that Lee had surrendered up in Virginia, so the Confederates wanted to start laying out terms for surrender. Now, also, and I've talked about this on the show, the big surrender in Hillsborough, or in Hillsborough, Durham, at the Bennett farm. This is when Johnston surrendered to Sherman. They had heard about that too. So the terms of their surrender, initially, they kind of modeled it after the Johnston-Sherman surrender. However, the Union rejected the terms, and Stoneman told them to pretty much keep fighting until they come up with better terms. And when he said keep fighting, what they did was went to Asheville and tore Asheville all to hell. Finally, they did come up with terms of surrender, and so Stoneman had one last order. Jefferson Davis was down there running from the law, and he was set out to help catch him. He was actually ordered to chase Jefferson Davis to the ends of the earth. So they took after Jefferson Davis, and they were already really close to where he was at that point anyway. So they almost caught him a few times. They did catch General Braxton Bragg and Joseph Wheeler, but they missed Jefferson Davis. Finally, on May 15th, Major General James H. Wilson's command, they caught up to Jefferson Davis in Irwin, Georgia. And there he was arrested. I've read extensively about Jefferson Davis fleeing from Union troops and his capture. It's kind of an interesting story. Some of it's kind of humorous, actually. But he was arrested. And that Jefferson Davis's arrest meant the official end to Stoneman's raid. Now, Davis was arrested, or he was captured on May 15th, but the raid, the date of the end of Stoneman's raid officially is April 26th. It lasted about a month, give or take. And that's all I have for this episode. I hope it was a good one to start the year out with. I hope you enjoyed it. As you can see, it's freezing out here. I've taken to wearing a scarf. I don't grab my scarf lightly, so when I grab my scarf, I'm pretty cold. Anyway, I'm glad to be back. I hope you guys are all still hanging out here. I hope you're still enjoying the show. As always, if you have a suggestion for an episode, you can contact me at the nceverythingpodcast@gmail.com. And you can join the Facebook group where I try to post Facebook stuff. I try to post North Carolina stuff as much as possible. I have kind of backed off of Facebook a little bit, but it's free for you guys to use. You can communicate with each other and post stuff, and occasionally I'll get on there and post a little bit, but I have really backed off of Facebook. It's nothing personal to you guys. Just social media is a rough place sometimes. I think that's all I have. Don't forget to check out I got links below. It's been a little while since I went through all this. If you're listening and you want to put a face with the voice, check out the links below. I put my podcast on YouTube. And if you are watching on YouTube and you'd rather just listen, that can be found on most podcast players. Also on YouTube, I do a little sideshow with my wife. I try to do it monthly, but it's called Tasting NC, where we taste everything that has anything to do with North Carolina. And that's really all I have. I'm going to head in and warm up and edit the show and get it going. So for you guys, I'll talk to you in a couple weeks.